Union corruption refers to the unethical or illegal practices conducted by union officials or members, often involving the abuse of power for personal gain. This form of corruption can manifest in various ways, including embezzlement of union funds, accepting bribes in exchange for favorable contract terms, or colluding with employers to the detriment of union members. The concept of union corruption is significant because it undermines the core purpose of unions, which is to protect workers' rights and advocate for fair labor practices. When corruption infiltrates these organizations, it can erode trust among union members, weaken collective bargaining power, and ultimately harm the very individuals the unions are meant to serve. One prominent example of union corruption is the scandal involving the United Auto Workers, UAW, in the United States. Several high-ranking union officials were convicted of embezzling millions of dollars from the union's training centers and using the money for personal luxuries. This scandal damaged the UAW's credibility and raised questions about accountability and transparency within unions. Another example is the case of the International Brotherhood of Teamsters, where leadership was historically plagued by connections to organized crime. Investigations led to federal oversight and reforms, but the legacy of corruption continued to challenge the union's legitimacy. Opinions supporting the need to address union corruption highlight the importance of maintaining ethical leadership in unions to ensure they fulfill their mission of advocating for workers. Advocates argue that transparency and strict regulatory frameworks are necessary to prevent corruption and preserve the integrity of unions. However, challenges and controversies arise regarding the extent of governmental oversight, with some arguing that excessive intervention can infringe on union autonomy and weaken their bargaining position. Critics also highlight that focusing solely on corruption can overshadow the positive contributions of unions to worker rights and social justice. Union corruption is intricately linked to other aspects of union operations, such as leadership selection, financial management, and member engagement. The presence of corruption can significantly hinder these functions by creating an environment of mistrust and inefficiency. Addressing corruption is crucial not only for restoring trust and effectiveness within individual unions, but also for strengthening the broader labor movement. By tackling corruption, unions can ensure they remain focused on their primary objectives, better serving their members and upholding the principles of fairness and equity in the workplace. The historical context and notable cases of union corruption provide crucial insights into the complexities of labor movements and their vulnerabilities. Union corruption refers to the illegal or unethical practices within labor organizations, where leaders or members engage in activities like embezzlement, bribery, racketeering, or collusion with employers, undermining the mission of unions to protect workers' rights. This concept is significant because it highlights an internal threat to the integrity and effectiveness of labor unions, potentially eroding trust among members and the general public, and weakening the collective bargaining power that unions are meant to wield. One notable case is that of the International Brotherhood of Teamsters, one of the largest unions in the United States. The Teamsters were infamously linked to organized crime and corruption, especially under the presidency of Jimmy Hoffa in the mid-20th century. The case of Hoffa is emblematic of how deeply entrenched corruption can become within unions, leading to federal investigations and significant legal actions. Another example is the United Auto Workers (UAW) scandal, which surfaced in the late 2010s, where top leaders were found guilty of misusing union funds on luxury travel and goods, raising questions about accountability and governance within unions. Opinions about union corruption often highlight the need for transparency and reform. Proponents of strong labor movements argue that while corruption cases are damaging, they should not overshadow the essential role unions play in advocating for workers. Critics, however, may use these instances as arguments against the necessity or efficacy of unions, pointing to these scandals as evidence of systemic flaws. Controversies surrounding union corruption frequently involve debates over the extent of government oversight required to prevent such abuses. Advocates for labor rights express concerns that too much intervention could undermine union autonomy, while others believe stringent regulations are necessary to protect union members from exploitation by their leaders. Union corruption connects to broader topics such as labor law, workers' rights, and organizational ethics. It influences discussions around the need for robust internal checks and balances, democratic processes within unions, and the potential necessity of external auditing. Understanding the historical context of these issues and analyzing notable cases helps in comprehending the delicate balance unions must maintain between exercising power and ensuring accountability, as they strive to fulfill their mission of representing and advancing the interests of workers. Mechanisms of corruption in unions refer to the various methods and practices through which unethical or illegal activities are conducted within labor unions to benefit a select few at the expense of the collective welfare of union members. These mechanisms can include financial misappropriation, bribery, nepotism, and manipulation of union elections. Understanding these mechanisms is crucial as they undermine the very foundations of unions, which are built on principles of solidarity, fairness, and advocacy for workers' rights. The importance of recognizing and addressing corruption in unions lies in preserving their integrity and ensuring they effectively represent and protect the interests of workers. Corruption diverts resources away from their intended purpose, which is to support and improve the conditions of union members, and can lead to a loss of trust among workers, weakening the union's influence and bargaining power. A notable example of union corruption is the case involving the United Auto Workers (UAW) union, where several top leaders were indicted on charges of embezzling millions of dollars in union funds for personal luxuries. This scandal not only hurt the union's reputation, but also weakened its negotiating stance with employers. Another example is the International Brotherhood of Teamsters, which has faced several corruption allegations over the years, involving bribery and ties with organized crime, highlighting the serious impact of corrupt practices on union operations and their public perception. Opinions supporting the need to address union corruption often emphasize the role of transparency and accountability mechanisms to ensure leaders act in the best interests of their members. Advocates for union reform argue for stricter regulations and oversight to prevent and detect corrupt activities before they become systemic. However, addressing union corruption is not without challenges. Some argue that increased regulatory oversight could hinder union operations and autonomy, potentially stifling their effectiveness. Others contend that corruption is not as pervasive as media portrayals suggest and caution against using isolated incidents to vilify unions as a whole. Mechanisms of corruption influence other aspects of union operations by affecting their credibility, membership engagement, and legislative influence. Efforts to combat corruption can enhance unions' advocacy capabilities, improve member trust and participation, and ultimately strengthen their role in negotiating better working conditions and benefits for employees. By tackling corruption, unions can reaffirm their commitment to their foundational mission of labor representation and equity. The impact of union corruption on workers and employers is a multifaceted issue that delves into how dishonest practices within unions can affect both the workforce and the businesses they are part of. At its core, union corruption refers to unethical or illegal activities carried out by union officials for personal gain, such as embezzlement of funds, accepting bribes, or colluding with employers to the detriment of union members. Its significance lies in the fact that unions are designed to protect workers' rights and interests, and corruption undermines this fundamental purpose, potentially exploiting the very workers they are meant to empower and creating an uneven playing field for employers. One clear impact of union corruption on workers is the diversion of funds that could have been used to improve working conditions, negotiate better wages, or secure other benefits. For instance, the case of the United Auto Workers scandal, where millions were embezzled by union officials, showcased how funds meant for workers' welfare were misappropriated, leaving many feeling betrayed and unprotected. Similarly, in the construction industry, there have been instances where union leaders have accepted kickbacks from employers in exchange for ignoring worker safety violations, thereby putting workers' health and lives at risk for personal gain. Employers, on the other hand, may face an imbalanced competitive environment due to union corruption. Honest businesses adhering to standards may find themselves at a disadvantage compared to those that have gained union favor through corrupt means. This can distort market dynamics and discourage fair business practices, ultimately harming economic growth and stability within the industry. Opinions supporting this notion emphasize the need for transparency and accountability within unions to maintain trust and credibility. Advocates argue for stricter oversight and reform to protect workers' rights and ensure fair practices. However, challenges to addressing union corruption include deeply embedded networks that resist change and the potential for backlash from those who benefit from the status quo. Controversies arise from the perception that highlighting union corruption undermines the broader labor movement, which is essential for advocating for worker rights. Critics argue that such discussions should be balanced with recognition of the overall positive impacts unions have historically had on labor conditions. The issue of union corruption is interconnected with broader themes of governance and responsibility within the labor movement. Addressing it effectively requires a concerted effort to reinforce ethical leadership, ensure financial transparency, and prioritize the genuine interests of workers. This, in turn, can strengthen the overall integrity and efficacy of unions, aligning them more closely with their original mission of supporting the workforce and promoting equitable labor relations.